Welcome to the Oral History Podcast, featuring stories from the oral history website voicesofoklahoma.com, where Oklahomans have given generously of their time to tell their life stories for present-day listeners and for generations to come. Our entire collection is available on the website voicesofoklahoma.com. Subscribe to be notified of new Oklahoma oral history podcasts. Here's another interesting storyteller from voicesofoklahoma.com. Voices of Oklahoma interviewed Nancy and Ted Kachel because their careers significantly impacted Tulsa. They were asked to write an introduction to their story. It is being read as written. We are Ted and Nancy, two lives entwined by shared ambition and curiosity. Our paths first crossed at Iowa University, where we married in 1961 and set out together on a journey that took us from New York to San Francisco, Ann Arbor, Bogota, Tulsa, and beyond. Along the way, we built careers in higher education of campus ministry and teaching religious studies, in social services with runaway kids and reproductive services, and in advocacy for psychedelic mysticism and healing domestic abuse. Adopted 3 wonderful children for Bogota, Colombia, and devoted ourselves to church and community. Through every move and milestone, we found in each other the missing pieces that made us whole. At every turn, we became the moving parts to click in place in each other's lives, pushing forward together in this adventure of life and love. Our motto, Braves, we've only just begun. Listen to their story on the podcast and website, voicesofoklahoma.com.
Today's date is May 14, 2025, and my name is John Erling. Let me just say at the outset here that we have never done this before, interviewed a couple, each with very distinctive and different careers. I could easily interview separately, but thought it would be fun, and yes, even entertaining, to have both of you, Nancy and Ted, here at the table together. So, since ladies go first, Nancy, would you state your full name, your date of birth, and your present age?
I'm Nancy Jean Kachel. I was born May 4th, 1940.
And your present age?
85.
85, and just celebrating a birthday.
Yes.
Right. So, Nancy, I know you're a little sensitive maybe about the sound of your voice. What led to this condition in the first place?
I have no idea. I mean,
and so that eventually you couldn't even use your vocal cords.
Yeah, well, and I did therapy, practice. I just quit talking. Nobody could hear me. So I was grateful that I've had 2 procedures now. The next step in about a month is a permanent one, and this one is that it's probably more like Botox, but it's not Botox. It's a fluffy kind of thing that pushes them together. Mm-hmm. The final one is permanent. The doctor said, we don't do this for everybody because they are not going to live that long. And I'm going, who's making that decision? But I'm grateful for it because I can at least talk.
So the man over here is your husband, Ted. Ted, give us your full name, your date of birth, and your present age.
Okay. My full name is Arthur Theodore Kachel. I was born on July the 7th, 1937. Presently, 87, just about 6 weeks away from 88.
Okay, and you feeling healthy enough to reach 88?
One should never presume on this, but yes, I am feeling rather vigorous. I never thought I would see the 80s. It's just amazing to me.
Okay, so Nancy, let's start with you. Where were you born?
I was born in Davenport, Iowa.
Give us your mother's name, maiden name, where she was born and raised.
Alberta Snackloth. Actually, it's Alberta Cecilia Snackloth, and she was born in Iowa in a little town named McCausland of 200 people.
And then your father's name?
My father's Dan Leslie Stevens, and he was born in Geneseo, Illinois, just across the river from Iowa.
All right, now let's talk about them. And they lived on a farm, and kind of go through that story.
From my parents on, okay, my parents got married. They were very poor. My dad had 1 cow and $10, and they were really like migrant workers that pick strawberries or whatever was in season at that point. The neighbors thought they weren't going to live, that they had so little to eat. I was born 11 months later and had to sell eggs to buy baby food for me. And it was just a really rough time for about 2 years until a bank said, look, Les, that was who everybody knew him as. The bank said, we'll loan you some money to rent a piece of property and we'll give you enough for 10 cows. And so they did that for 4 years. They lived on that piece of property. The bank said, done a great job, haven't missed a payment, we'll help you buy a farm. And that was a 600-acre farm that had actually been lost by his father, bankrupt. His father was a very wealthy man, periodically. He loved horses, he loved horse races, and he also built the first drag line and didn't copyright it or whatever you do. So
Drag line, what's that?
it's like a crane, but you drag it along, dredging. They dredged the Geneseo Canal, and his father would call Grandma on the other side of the river, the Mississippi, and say, I need for Les, my dad, to bring 20 horses across the Mississippi at night. I'll meet him on the other side at 2 o'clock in the morning. My dad he was 14. He had trained all those horses off the range from Colorado or wherever. Amazing. We wouldn't even let our kids put their foot in the Mississippi at that age. But he was remarkable, and he was an amazing horseback rider, and he, when he was in 20, I think, he traveled with my uncle all around the western part of the United States, and when they needed a little money, Dad would go to a professional rodeo, a bronc rider, the people that he finally got to know because he'd see him at various places. He would, when he showed up, they said, okay, that's it, we're not winning anything today. Mm-hmm. He was so successful. Anyway, that's just my genes too.
Well, you should be proud of that, and,
I am.
And how strong they were. The three of us sitting around here could never have done what they did.
Right.
I mean, those were pioneer people, weren't they?
Yeah. They finally moved to the farm that the bank helped facilitate. That Dad had an old truck that they herded cattle for 15 miles to get to the new farm. He had a shepherd dog, and mother drove the truck. My little brother, who was probably a year or two maybe old, was tucked in behind my mother, and I was on the other side, being 4 years old. And Dad stood on the running board on the right side of the truck, and he would command the dog from the truck, and he didn't have to get out of the truck all the way. The neighbors were lined up on the roads watching this scene, and I mean, it was an amazing thing for them.
So that dog was herding these cattle, and your father could send that. I love dogs. I love those kind of stories.
Right.
That is beautiful.
Yeah, he didn't have to do anything except maybe snap his fingers or
Yep.
haul out a command.
Yeah. And isn't there? Didn't he sell their herd in a nationwide sale?
Right. My dad was really known nationwide for his herd, and he was the president of the Hereford
Association, let's call it. Huh?
Yeah, and in that position, everybody in the country knew the Hereford herd, and so he put it up for sale. He sold the herd, and then revealed that he had 30 head of cattle. Nobody knew until the sale was over.
And I'm going to prompt you here because you also wrote, kind of summarizing this, how they made things out of nothing, believed we did not own the earth, and that we should leave it better than we found it.
That was his message to my 5 brothers, knowing that they would probably each be farmers or do something with the land. And he was very clear that you took care of the earth, and when you left, it should be better than when you went there.
Yeah. So there were 6 siblings.
Yes.
And you're the only girl.
I'm the oldest girl.
Wow.
I was my dad's favorite daughter.
Well, I'm sure you did stories about that as well. That's a remarkable story you've just related here, that's for sure. Ted, do you think you can match that?
Well, I can hang in there a little bit.
All right, so let's give your mother's name and where she was from.
Her name was Frida Clara Kachel. She was a twin, identical. Her aunt, my aunt, her sister, was Theda Barra Maxwell. They both were born as gardeners. Lamar, Missouri is the area that they came from, where they were initially born. Her father, True, developed his own career as a kind of traveling salesman to Springfield, Missouri. But it was there that also her mother, my grandmother, Minta, had family, of which one was one of the leading pioneer doctor surgeons named Arthur Delano Craig, after which I'm named Arthur. Wonderful story. Briefly, why did my family never call me Arthur? Well, about 12 months before, after my mom and dad had been married, my dad's name is Virgil Kachel, in Springfield, she went in to see A.D., as he was known, the doctor. And after he examined her, he said to her, well, Frida Clara, you're pregnant. And then 11 months later, I was born. Now, either I was one of the first 11-month pregnancies, or A.D. wanted his first great-grandson, which is what I became.
So, okay, that was your mother's side, your father now.
Virgil Kachel, his middle name was Samuel, Virgil Samuel Kachel. He really was born from a pioneer family. His father and mother were homesteading in New Mexico near a place called Portales. His father, even though they were very successful at keeping that 640 acres going, and therefore became their land, his father one day accidentally was kicked by a horse. And even though it didn't kill him, he began to worry about himself because he couldn't always think straight. And he then shot himself, leaving my little bitty, maybe 5 foot tall grandmother named Ethel. And Ethel had 4 kids by that time, of which my father was the youngest. He had 3 older sisters. She then took those 4 kids and went to the southeast corner of Colorado where there was some other territory you could settled another 640 acres. Turned out to be the banker for all the pioneers in her area because she was trusted. Settled that land, sold it, went back to Springfield, Missouri to be with her, where the Kachel family was, along with the Gardners and the Craigs. All of those were in Springfield at the time. She only survived another 3 years because she was killed in the smallpox epidemic, leaving the 4 children as orphans. And they were taken in by another part of the Kachel family.
This is your grandmother. Your grandmother.
My grandmother, Ethel. I finally have a picture of her. Lovely looking woman, but was obviously a real pioneer woman.
Yep.
She knew how to do it and did it.
All right. And then your father...
He grew up in Springfield, Missouri, being raised by an uncle who was a Church of God minister. It was a rough time for the 4 young orphans, particularly as my uncle, the preacher, his wife, was a very tough old lady. And therefore, Dad always talked about the fact that the 4 orphans, were always the second table to be fed. First table was the family that had adopted them as orphans. So he grew up with a kind of tough thing. Finally, as he was becoming of age, his 4 sisters had all fled, gotten married, and one of them asked him to come to Ohio, Aunt Lucy, and live with her and her family. And that really became Dad's growing up. By the time he hit high school, however, he came back to Missouri, a little town called Nevada, Missouri, which is where I will grow up. And Dad, his eldest sister, Aunt Aline, took him in and raised him through high school. And it was in high school in Nevada, Missouri, that my dad and mom met. Frida, Clara, and Virgil met. And I was born later in Springfield because they went back for the birth to make sure that A.D. Craig, the doctor, could see to my birth.
Were you an only child?
I was an only child, still am as far as I know.
We don't have time to check the records right now. So Nancy, then where did you grow up and begin to attend school?
Well, the farm that was rented by the bank and my family was near a small town called Princeton. And when they migrated closer to a little town called McCausland. And that's where I grew up.
This is in Iowa?
In Iowa, yeah. And that was a 600-acre farm, and mostly swamps and great hunting. So, and my dad loved hunting, but that's when he started his herd of cattle.
Mm-hmm. So then, your first grade school
was a single building, 1 grade. I mean,
K through 12 probably, or first grade through 12 probably.
Yeah.
Right. Right.
And that was, I think, we maybe had 11 to 14 kids during the time I was there, and I graduated from there, that little school.
Yeah, graduated high school.
Graduated grade school.
Oh, and then on to high school.
Yeah.
Where was that?
In DeWitt, Iowa. My dad had gone there. That was the way the land was separated, divided to identify areas for these little schools around the state.
How big was that high school? How many?
Well, the class I graduated in, I think, was 74.
What year did you graduate from high school?
1958.
Then did you go on to college from there?
Yes, I did. I went to Iowa University, University of Iowa.
And you graduated with what?
I did not graduate from Iowa. I got married.
To this man sitting over here?
Right, 3 years after I left at the end of 3 years. Went to New York with Ted.
Well, let's catch up then with Ted and his education. So Ted, then what grade school and what town were you in?
Okay, Nevada, Missouri. In other words, the place where my father and my mother had met in high school. And later, years later, 20 years later, I will graduate from that same high school, 1955. What happened was the World War II intervened, and my dad, who had been trained by that time in his sister's shoemaking shop as a shoemaker, an upholsterer, he found that he could get a job working in the Navy Yard in Charleston, South Carolina. They were recruiting all over the place for people who could work with canvas and do things with leather. The Navy needed it. So we moved in 1941 to Charleston, South Carolina, and would stay there throughout the war and would not return to Nevada, Missouri when I was in the 3rd grade, and then would continue my schooling there up through high school, and therefore, as I say, graduate the same high school my parents had met in, but 20 years later.
I'm thinking of Pearl Harbor Day, December 7th, 1941.
Yeah.
You remember that day?
I do remember it, even though I was just a kid. And the reason was my parents, by that time, had become very active in helping found a new Southern Baptist church in the project, the federal project, big brick buildings that had been built for all the workers to be brought in to work in that Navy Yard. And they were having a great Sunday afternoon after church down on the beach. And that's the reason I remember it so clearly, because all of a sudden, someone on the beach yelled, "Hey, we've been attacked." And they all rushed over to listen on the radio in one of the cars. And as a little kid, of course, I was in the midst of all this wondering what was going on. And I'm not sure I fully understood, but I could tell the adults got serious very quickly. And that later, of course, it would be explained to me that we had been attacked by the Japanese at a place out in the middle of the ocean called Pearl Harbor.
Yeah. So you graduate from high school what year?
55.
And then you're on to...
Actually, my first year in college was spent in Springfield, Missouri, because I had family there. Again, the doctor and his family were still there, but my grandmother also, Minta, was there. And it was a great year for me to get to know better, particularly my grandmother. We went to church together and spent a lot of time together. But it was a kind of slender year also. My parents didn't really have much money to help me. Fortunately, at that time, the university there was called Southwest Missouri State College, and it was free. Essentially, if you were a Missouri resident, you could go to that college, and I did. And I had actually a great experience because some of the youngest professors were people who had returned from the war, obviously, and gotten their degrees on the GI Bill, et cetera. And so it was a very exciting year for me in lots of ways. I got involved in the theater for the first time, did several roles, understudied Curly, and then finally played
in Oklahoma.
No, in Oklahoma, yes,
Curly in
musical.
Oklahoma, right?
Yeah, I was his understudy, and then the following summer I played Jimmy in a play that we toured to Joplin. Hey, big times! But it was after that I saw this article in Life magazine about the Baylor Theater and what was going on there in terms of what initially was experienced as the three-sided Hamlet, because Burgess Meredith and Charles Lawton had gotten to know the professor, Paul Baker, during World War II, because after the war was settled in Europe, he became the head of the USO Entertainment, and they therefore met all these actors and performers. And so they came to help him establish a nationally recognized theater company at Baylor University. And that attracted me. And so the next year, my grandmother funding the tuition going to a private school now, I went to Baylor University, which I would then graduate 3 years later in 1959 in theater, but also in theological and religious studies.
Were you ever intending to be a minister?
At that time, I certainly wasn't. No. It was only later in graduate school in Iowa, where Nancy and I met, which was 59 to 61. I was one of the 6 National Defense Fellows in theater that had been picked in the whole country, and we were getting an absolutely free ride if we wanted to, at the Pentagon's expense, all the way through a PhD program. I did the first 2 years and took my master's degree because I was then offered another fellowship by the Rockefeller brothers, who were looking to find new blood for the ministry. So I said, okay. They offered me a trial year. I could go to any seminary I wanted. And because of, by this time, my fascination and love of theater, I picked Union Seminary in New York City. So a month, 6 weeks after we were married in August of 1961, we found ourselves in Union Seminary in a dormitory for married couples.
Wow. The urge to act, was that in high school that come about? Were you performing there?
Yes, in the sense that I did some of my first things. But the interesting thing in my mind, anyway, is my dad actually had such a good experience when he was in high school about acting in plays with a young teacher that was very helpful to them. And I can remember him telling me, he said, Ted, the most fun I ever had was acting in Midsummer Night's Dream in high school. And he played, I believe he played, it was one of the, mechanicals, one of the crazy guys. And he was the one that I think had the moon lantern. And he would tell me that story again and again. And that's what really drew me into acting in high school, and I just did a couple of roles there. But when I moved to Springfield, I had already begun at 14 being a staff radio announcer. And that also encouraged my sense of presenting myself by voice, being present in that sense.
So you inherited this from your father.
I really did.
But you also got encouragement from him as well.
Yes.
And you can really owe him a lot for that and many other things as well, I'm sure. Nancy, you were too young for Pearl Harbor to remember?
I was a very small child, but I remember the excitement. My mother, who I have not talked about, grew up in a family of 8 children, a very German family. They stopped speaking German because they were terrified of what would happen if somebody found out. So I was aware that there was this other language, but I was, 4 years old. Anyway, my mother was the fifth or sixth child in order. They had no money. Grandpa was a farmer and a junk dealer and whatever he could do. My mother and her sister, the closest one, would share shoes, and one would go to school one day and then wear the shoes and trade off the next day. So they were very poor. My grandmother, when my mother was probably 16 or 18, died of cancer and left 3 children with no mother. My mother became the mother, and she got, I think she made it through 8th grade, but she couldn't go any further.
Yeah.
And so my mother's never known anything but work and raising kids.
Yeah.
She loved children, so it was a gift in that sense. Very generous woman. She'd do anything for anybody. A real pillar of the church. My dad and mom really almost owned the church. As they grew older, they probably gave money to keep it going and so on. Mother always felt self-conscious about the fact that she didn't have even a high school graduation. She wasn't 18, she was more like 14 when she had to become a mother.
Look how wealthy she was in other areas.
Oh, yes. She was great.
And both of you drew a strong work ethic from both sides of your families and all.
We both are so grateful for our families.
Yes. That is so important to, as we have grown older and, made family of our own and all that, to realize what a gift both of our original families were, not because they had a whole lot of resources, but because they were just such good, basic human beings.
And it took both of you probably years to look back and realize that, because I'm saying that about myself.
Sure.
Then we look back and realize what we were given as examples.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right. Let me then take you to 1961 when you were married.
Right.
All right. How did you two meet? You guys who's going to start?
Well, I was actually at the university before this dude.
Yeah.
And so I was engaged in a Methodist Wesley Foundation. And I had spent a lot of time there. And Ted was Southern Baptist. And when he came, he got involved in the Wesley program, probably because it was more liberal. And so at the university.
A University of
Iowa.
Of Iowa.
In Iowa City, that's what it was. But let me tell you the other side of this story so you get the real picture. She's right. I was coming in as a grad student, so I arrived a year later. She'd been there a year. When I went to church, it was at an American Baptist church, a nice community church that I found easily early on. And one Sunday morning, I was sitting there that fall, and all of a sudden, our service was disrupted by this group marching down the center of the aisle who were representing CORE, the Congress for Racial Equality. And they were there to protest the fact that even this Baptist church was still segregated. And guess who was in the midst of that march? Wearing a dress I would later learn that she had designed for and built for herself, which had a kind of ballooning cape on the back of it, and they all had black armbands in, and they all marched in and sat on the front row, and it was a big upset, as you can imagine. Yet we recovered and went on with church service, but they stayed with us all that time, and one of their leaders was asked by the minister to speak why they were there and doing this, and so it was a good experience. On the other hand, for me, it was all about seeing this incredibly attractive young woman who obviously managed to keep beauty and her sense of protest ethics together in a package. And I said to one of my kids or friends who was sitting next to me, I said, I'm going to get to know that woman. I want to know what makes her tick.
So do you recall when he came up to you and what you...
Well, no, I did not in that situation, but he started going to the Wesley Foundation, and that's when we met. Yeah. And he's very articulate, very bright, and I thought, wow, that kind of sounds good.
Yes. So how long did it take for you to say, well, we're interested in dating? And
oh, that was too funny, because he is a Cancer, so he always goes around and around. And we were at the Methodist Foundation, the Wesley House, watching a movie or something, and there were several kids there. And he said to me, he said, you know, there's a really good play on Saturday night, and it's very good. You ought to see it. So I went back to my room, and I said, was that a request for a date? And I struggled with that, and I said, I'll just get dressed in case. And he showed up.
So that was your first date?
Yep.
Yeah.
Seeing a play. All right. So let's move you along here. Marriage is the end goal, but how long did it take before you were married from this early inception here?
Well, and the bump period was around the first of the year, where I finally got around to asking her to marry me. And then we would be married, of course, the following summer when I had finished up my MA. But I don't know, is there any part of that story you want to please?
Again, he was doing his circling. We had friends and that were dating and so on, and it was New Year's Eve, and they got engaged. And I told Ted the next morning that when I went over to Wesley, and I said that they just got engaged, and he said, oh, I was going to ask you to marry me, but I don't want to follow suit.
Didn't want to be a copycat, eh?
That passed for a proposal, would you believe, because she took me up on that.
When she said yes right away?
I said, okay, I'm calling my parents.
So then you were married again, the date?
August the 10th, 1961. It was, in other words, the following, that was the beginning of 1961, the January that we're talking
and
about.
that was the end of his schooling there. Because
Yeah, my master's. Yeah.
All right, so then this August, how many years would you have been married?
Would you believe 64?
Isn't that amazing?
It is amazing.
64. So then everybody asks,
Well, I've always said we've been married 8 times.
yes?
We went through those ups and downs.
Yep.
That point that, well, this may be it. And that's because I think both of us are so bored with the same old, same old.
Mm-hmm.
And we'd reach a plateau, and it was going on too long, and then we would get itchy, and we'd need to find some other way of making it new again.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's a lot in that we could unpack right there, but that's good. And
Yeah.
you weathered the storms, in other words.
She almost left me when we were doing the field research in San Francisco in the summer of 1969. And I came back because we had been fighting over something, which, of course, I have no way of remembering. But I came back and I found her packing her suitcase and saying, I'm going back to New York, forget it. This is just not working out. And I forget what I did exactly, but I apologized some way and said, look, the last thing I want is to lose you.
Yeah.
If you're going back, then I'm going to go back. We've got to work this out. But that was the closest in my memory that we came to really splitting the blanket, I think, is one of the phrases.
And look today,
Yeah.
what a nice marriage relationships you guys have.
Oh,
Everybody,
we really do.
yeah,
Yeah,
everybody
we do.
thinks of Nancy and Ted together.
Here we are doing the couple.
You're right. So Nancy, I'm going to track you here from 1961 to 1962. You were a teacher in New York City, Brick Presbyterian Church Nursery School. So you're married at that point.
Yeah, yeah.
Tell us about that a little bit.
Well, Ted then went to Union Theological Seminary. I went along, of course, but I couldn't go to that, so I had to get a job. And the Brick Presbyterian Church, very, very wealthy church in New York City. They were looking for somebody to be a 4-year-old teacher or whatever. I didn't have a degree. I didn't have any of the needed things. But the preacher, the top preacher, the main preacher, interviewed me, and he said, okay, you got a job. That handshake was exactly what I wanted to see. Isn't that interesting?
Yes, it is, right.
But the other thing, wasn't it immediately after that or something? When did they send you to
yeah.
the clothes closet?
Well, I, of course, made all my clothes and a little wacky. So they said, you really need some different clothes. Well, this place had a garage sale, we would call it. A huge, huge thing. They had a gold knitted dress, solid gold knitted dress on sale, probably $20,000. Anyway, they let me go into the used clothes closet. I had the fabulous collection of clothes from that place, wools and leathers, and I mean, I hadn't seen clothes like that.
So how could you describe the clothes you were making? I'm going to use the word hippie, or were you far out? What was wrong with the clothes you were wearing?
Well, it was probably skirts and I don't know. I don't remember tight skirts. It was fashionable at that time.
And it wasn't appropriate.
It wasn't appropriate.
You remain in New York City. You're an executive secretary to Lever Brothers headquarters. And what is that?
It's a soap company. They make all sorts of soaps, and at that time, it was a big deal. And Unilever was a part of that, or they were part of Unilever, which was in Britain. I think I worked on the 19th floor. I had no degree at that point. I couldn't even type. I still can't.
Tell them what they did about typing to you.
I had to pass a test on typing, and they timed me at 13 words a minute. And so I said, well, I think I can do 55 the last time I checked. And so they said, well, you're probably just out of it for the, need a little prepping. And so they sent me to a school. This guy was supposed to test me. And we sat and talked, and we just had a great time. He said, finally, I'm supposed to be testing you. And so I'm supposed to be testing you, and so I typed 55 words a minute. So he said, well, you were just a little rusty. You can go back and do it. I typed 14 words a minute.
He wanted you to hire you so bad, right?
Yeah, they did.
They did. They just thought I was okay.
Yeah. Right. So then let's track you too, Ted, because this was 63 and 64. What was happening to you?
Okay, we did the first year in seminary, which would have been 1961 to 62. I had completed my obligation for the fellowship that I had been given by the Rockefeller brothers. But at that same time, some people from the University of Pennsylvania who had a campus ministry there came up and were interviewing students and offering them a chance to go and live in Philadelphia for a year and be an intern in campus ministry. And that sounded really cool to me. I applied, and they hired me, and it was maybe in the summer sometime, we moved down to Philadelphia for the first time. And we spent a year there and did campus ministry. And I learned lots of stuff. But one of the other things is Nancy and I in that year began in the basement of what was known as the Christian Association, which was where all the campus ministries were. Down in the basement, we began a coffee house that we called the Catacombs. And then we also created a satirical review, much like That Was the Week That Was very popular at that time. And so every Friday night we would do this big satirical review, and became very popular. We would pack the coffee house every time we would do the review.
We were, in fact, illegal. It would just be stuffed with people.
Yeah, right.
And he and I did Liz and Dick.
Right. Remember how Richard Burton and Elizabeth Taylor were the Cleopatra and all that was happening?
Yep.
So we would do satirical versions of their movie together as a couple.
They had 3 or 4 movies out at the same time. Mm-hmm. And so we'd run backstage and put on a different hat and come out and do the same words. The same dialogue. In other words, someone would announce that this is now the Sandpiper movie, and that here these 2 idiots would come back out. We did lots of crazy stuff.
We had great fun.
So you were an actress yourself?
Oh, yes. No way.
Well, it was good enough to have fun.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
And the month in which we were after married and aiming to New York, I had a job to go to a summer camp called Green Lake for the Baptists. And I cast Nancy in Jean-Paul Sartre's play for No Exit. She was going to play one of the major roles in that too. So yeah, she could have done acting. It's just she finally wandered away from that world.
Mm-hmm. And we're glad you did. Because as people follow along the story, they find out what you did. I'm going to move along here. 68 to 69, you were a social worker at Judson Church Runaway House in New York City. What's a runaway house?
Well, at that time, there were a lot of kids on the streets. Haight-Ashbury out in California set up the first house for runaway kids. we were the second one, and I was the guiding force in that one. And the church, Judson Memorial, had like a residence rooms where students could stay. Well, they emptied the students and we filled it with runaway kids. And we were illegal as all get out. But we made a deal with the police that if that they had a family coming to get fined to locate whatever, that if we would be told so we could evacuate the kids before the family, because these kids were abused. They were places in their heads. There was no way they were going back home without some real help, and we did that too. We would try to put them together again.
You're planting the seed for what you eventually did maybe in that area, because there you were caring for children who were abused, and it carried on to other areas of your life.
Well, I think that's true.
Right.
It wasn't intentional. I had no.
Yeah. But you had the patience to do that.
Oh, it was such a need. I never thought about patience.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I taught them how to do things that they could do themselves, like make jewelry. We went to hardware stores and picked out all sorts of little things that you could make earrings out of. I taught them that they could make area rugs by scraps carpet that we would just glue together and sell it. And we did lots of things like that that could benefit them in the future.
Well, the fact that you even were creative enough to do that is...
Oh, well, I grew up on a farm.
Okay.
My dad was amazing. He could make anything.
Mm-hmm. All right. And then you were in another runaway house. This was in Ann Arbor, Michigan. So, Ted, why don't you come in here, too? How did you end up in Ann Arbor, Michigan?
Well, of course, we have this period where we are in Philadelphia. Finally, we return, and I was hired as a permanent campus minister beginning what? That would have been 64 to 66, I think. And while we were doing that, I realized that probably I wasn't really a pastoral minister type. I could do campus minister, loved being in the university world, working with students, and had a great time doing that. So I decided that if I was going to be in the university, I had to get a PhD, that you just don't stay in the university without one. So I applied again back to Columbia, which is affiliated in academic graduate studies with Union Seminary. So I applied to their PhD program in religious studies. Particularly, I was interested in the sociology of religion. And I was accepted, and so finally, by the time, 66, I guess, I went back, began to commute to New York City, even though we had purchased our first house and were living in Philadelphia, and I'd go back and forth. A good buddy of mine traveled with me all the time. He was involved in organizing clergy and laity concerned about Vietnam, the big protest movement. So that was going on at the same time, and we were involved in that both in Philly and in New York and other ways. So it was through doing that, commuting again to get the PhD program, that we got up to the place where I needed to do the field work. My committee said, yes, we want to have the first person to go out and actually study the use of hallucinogenic drugs amongst young people and others in the San Francisco area. And we agreed to do it. And so we went out there.
I'm sure people listening to this, the hallucinogenic drugs were catching everybody's ears.
Yes.
Did you have to sample it to do a good research project?
We did. That, in fact, was recommended by one of the leading researchers at Harvard who had done a very famous research by the name of Dr. Walter Pankey. He was a psychiatrist, and he said, Ted, you gotta have this experience or you'll never understand why people are doing it. He had led a group of Harvard divinity students through an experience earlier, about 2 years earlier. So anyway, we said, okay, we'll try and find some way to do it. And sure enough, we found a way, a guide who would procure the LSD drug, which was what we had asked for, and guide us. And we were going to be in his apartment place in Sausalito, California, for the experience, this all-day experience. He said, you know, you won't be able to do anything else for the day. And so Nancy and I both dropped about, 9 o'clock in the morning, and we were still there coming down from the drug at midnight, really, and then we stayed overnight. They asked us just to stay there, and so we did not go back to where we were living across the bay at Berkeley in one of the seminary apartments that we had managed to procure for that time period.
So, Nancy, did you wonder what this guy has gotten me into? If my parents only knew. And, okay, we probably don't have time to delve into all of that, but what did it do to your mind?
The last part or
this LSD, this trip?
Well, I had been around kids doing drugs for 2 or so years when I was taking care of these kids. So I was very familiar with them. Mm-hmm. I hadn't done LSD. I maybe smoked a joint once or twice, but I knew, and I think that's part of why Ted did this study, is he was aware of the stuff, learning from we were learning together in many instances. So that didn't bother me at all. I don't know if you heard my Leary story, but in the midst of all this, when Ted was doing his back and forth to Sausalito, and I was in New York, and he was trying to find Leary out there.
I had an introduction to Leary from Pankey.
Timothy.
Yeah,
Timothy Leary.
Yeah.
Pankey had been involved with Leary. Leary had been one of his professors at Harvard.
Ted called me from out west and said, Leary is not out here. I said, well, I'm coming out. We'll figure something out. So I got on the plane. Right in front of me was Timothy Leary.
Oh.
So I went, Dr. Leary, my husband is out on the West Coast wanting to get together with you. Probably thought he was a narc or something. So I told him of our common person that we knew. He said, oh, well, let's get a seat together. And he starts moving people around. And so we could sit together. And, of course, he was signing autographs, so part of the way. But for 6 hours, we had a chance to spend time together. Neat guy.
And he was jealous when he found out that you got to fly with him.
Larry said to me when we were getting off the plane, he said, just tell him I'm your traveling companion. He sat with me. Ted was late. He sat with me for 30 minutes, and he said, finally, I guess I should go home. So he left, and he came back in 10 minutes with a newspaper, so I'd be sure to have something to do.
So real quick, you should say who Timothy Leary was, why he was so famous.
Well, Timothy Leary, of course, was the leading proponent in the 60s by this time, and moving into the 70s, of the idea that psychedelic drugs and the psychedelic drug experience would manifest your mind in such ways, either for therapeutic success or even spiritual growth. And that was what he was now preaching, in the sense that he would hold these public meetings and give out that experience. We had all these introductions to him from Pankey and some of the others at Harvard who had been involved with Leary when he and Alpert were first doing some of their prison experiments. That was where the contact had been made. So by the time Nancy got there and I was stuck in Portland and then came down, he then said, well, look, call me. That is, he told Nancy, call me and you can come out. He said, I have this place we live in Berkeley, and you can come out and spend time with us. And we did that the next day or two.
It was the next day.
And had a great time. He was very generous with his time, etc. Do you want to tell the radio story?
Yeah, sure. We were sitting on the balcony and just a nice, wonderful discussion and location. And he got a phone call. He went in and answered it. He came out and he said, I've got to do the thing on the radio. You can come out. I mean, you can come in or you stay out here. And of course, we're going to go in. So we went in. He had this mattress on the floor we sat on and listened to him. And at that point, he became manic. He became the person that you would see on television. But that was just his show thing.
Oh,
yeah.
I mean, his way of relating to the masses. But
Media.
it was an act.
It was an act, yeah. And we saw it. And as soon as he finished the radio and interview, then he came back and we sat down and had breakfast, as I recall. It was pretty much, or maybe it was lunch. But anyway, he was very generous, trying to help me understand what I needed to do the field research. And he was the one who recommended. He said, move around until you find a young group that seems to be using these drugs and get their permission to spend time with them. And that was what I did. And I ended up focusing my research on a fellow who had been a professor, kind of teaching assistant at San Francisco State by the name of Stephen Gaskin. And Gaskin had begun to gather a religious community around him successfully. It would continue, and that was the community we followed. They would come finally to visit us when we took our position in Ann Arbor in the fall of 1970. They continued in a caravan of 28 buses across the United States back to San Francisco, and then decided and came back to Summertown, Tennessee, settled there. Their continuing community exists there, and they're simply called the Farm, which is what Stephen named them. And even though he has passed on, that is, he passed on in, I think, I don't know, 90, something like that, 1990, just aged out. You know,
Mm-hmm.
but that farm has continued to prosper and functions as what I refer to now as the psychedelic Amish folk, because they've simplified. They're vegans in terms of their diet, but they have created certain kinds of businesses. They even have a publishing firm.
You did this research, you experienced it, and so then you had to write a conclusion.
Mm-hmm.
What was your assessment?
Well, the hypothesis that I had established to do the field research on was, can you find a community coming out of the hallucinogenic experience that would qualify in all sociological senses as a religious movement or religious community? And so I had gone back and done the research throughout the histories of religion, because these drugs do reappear in various, really geographically widespread in many religions, but usually always in the earlier moments. And so I was asking the question that my professors were also interested in: do we have one now? And if so, will they continue to use the drug when they become fully organized as a religious community? And it was just sheer luck that the year I happened to be studying them, they went through that transition, where essentially his teachings, he would hold these meetings and do teachings all about all the ways they were changing their life. And even though they referenced the psychedelic experience as a mystical experience in their view, by the time they settled in the farm, he had decided it was not good for them to continue using either peyote or LSD, psilocybin, any of those. Instead, they grew grass and would smoke marijuana, but that was the extent to which their drug usage continued at that time. So my hypothesis was demonstrated in the substance of that 1 year of field research. I was delighted as a researcher, but totally surprised that it had happened that quickly.
Are people using psychedelic drugs today?
Sure. In fact, there is a renaissance going on right now, and there was almost, and this is a long story, but there was almost a group called MAPS who got the FDA to consider approving, after they had done several clinical trials, just like the FDA had demanded, trying to get them to approve what is known as MDMA, which is one of the, what can you describe it as, a short-term acting psychedelic that has been very successfully used, particularly with veterans dealing with PTSD. The FDA turned them down this time and said, go do another clinical trial, and we'll see if they finally get it approved. But right now, none of the psychedelics have been moved off of what is known as Schedule I drugs, which says they have no medical use. There's lots and lots of work going on. My prediction is that in less than 5 years, it will be a standard drug in the medical community's use for certain kinds of therapeutic interventions. Yes.
So it really can expand the mind?
Well,
how do I say that?
I can give you the neuroscience, simple. The neuroscience that has been done suggests that what these drugs do is disrupt the default mode network you and I use to create reality, just like we are now doing, okay? And that these momentarily disrupt that default mechanism that we have developed for surviving as a human species and getting through our daily activities, and gives us the chance to use the capacity of the brain to reassemble itself, and therefore could have tremendous therapeutic use for people who have suffered specific traumas. But also, the idea is manifesting the mind, which is literally what the word means, psychedelic, that it could also potentially help even the neuroscience people finally understand the way the brain operates in a bigger sense, a fuller sense. Mm-hmm. But still to be determined.
Should we let everybody know that we are on LSD right now doing this?
If we were, we would not be having this conversation, I assure you.
Well, I just give you one thing about that. My experience was very different than his, but when I got through it, I felt like I'd been to the top of the mountain.
Yeah, my LSD experience, the key takeaway for me, it lasted for hours, but the key takeaway was I died. I literally died. And fortunately, I had done enough work to understand that that might be one of the things that would happen as an experience to me.
It was his ego that died, and it rose right back up.
But that was the experience that I had, John. It is not atypical. Lots of people on particularly LSD, which is the most powerful of them, and which is what I had that day.
Yeah. Okay, let's track Nancy, because then you're following along with her, of course. In Ann Arbor, you were in the real estate business from 77 to 81?
I think, John, if I can interrupt.
Yes, you may.
When Ted was going back and forth from Philadelphia to New York, I worked for a bank. I had no idea it was the mafia bank, but I was there for a few months, and one of the guys told me that it was run by the president was a mafia, and he had killed somebody. So the bank protected him, and he had his minions around to take care of him. So anyway, I was benefits administrator in that place, and we needed a new car, and we didn't have any money. So I went down to the finance person who had become a friend, and I said, do you have any recommendations for a car that I might buy? And he said, well, give me a couple of days. He called me back and he said, I have an American Ambassador with 1,600 miles on it, and I could sell that to you for $1,600. And I'm going, and what's in the trunk?
Right.
It was clearly part of their scheme. They were always very nice. However, chief guy died, I guess, and there was a migration of all the people that were taking care of him. The other part of that is we lived in a house, a row house, and we were the end of the row, and there was a 10-foot chain link fence where we could get our car into the yard. And the next door was
it was all jukeboxes and
Right.
pinball machines. Yeah.
and they would park their car in front of my gate, and I'd come home and I'd have to get them to move it. And every day I'd have to go back and see them, and they would be in the back corner of the building playing poker, and I'd have to go back. The guys on the dock loved it, and they'd go, "You go, girl." But one day I said, "Would you move your Cadillac, black Cadillac?" And without looking at me, one of them said, "Would you like one?"
And you said?
I said, "Thank you, no, but please move it."
I don't know if this is a time to say how in the world did you ever come to Tulsa, Oklahoma or not, but if you want to,
We've got to get there some way.
We got to do that. So let's talk about that. And maybe, Ted, you can tell us what you were doing.
Well, what happened essentially is after that time that we had in Ann Arbor, the 5-year period, there was a brief time we went to Earlham College. I was head of the Soch department, taught there for 2 years. Didn't work out for us. We just didn't fit into that Quaker community. So we went back, and I taught in engineering humanities at Michigan again. And that was a wonderful experience. But after that, I had finished everything on the PhD and essentially defended it in 1974 and received my degree in January of 75. So I was ready then to try and find a teaching appointment in a philosophy and religion department. And that's what essentially happened by 1979. But again, The family was still in Ann Arbor, and we were commuting back and forth. By this time, by the way, we had been to Columbia, adopted 2 young kids. Nancy had her hands full not only with real estate, but she was trying to raise these kids.
We had the 3rd one by then.
But did we have the 3rd one? Yeah, we ended up with 3, but the last one was 12 years old when she came to us. Nancy can explain that if you wish. But anyway, therefore, we were offered a teaching appointment, that is, I was, at the University of Northern Iowa in philosophy and religion. So that's how we moved the family, et cetera, finally over there. And it was there up through 1984, as I was teaching, that again I saw this fellowship offer that came through from NEH that said there's a theater company in Tulsa that's looking for a scholar in residence to work with them. Well, that was a perfect combination for me, theater and scholarship. And so I applied, and they hired me, and we came down, got here, I think it was right after Christmas in '84, and I began working for the American Theater Company for the next 2 years here in Tulsa.
Okay, American Theater Company brought you here.
Right.
All right. And Nancy, were you ready for that move? I mean, what were you doing when he gets this?
Well, I was working for a building company in Michigan, and I was their marketing person. You know, I worked there for, 3 or 4 years. And so I just quit the job.
Right.
But I had, during that time, the market in Tulsa was skyrocketing. So we came down here, my boss and I, and looked around, and, you know, we said, oh, this is not a fun place. It's so segregated. And where we want to build, we couldn't sell diverse populations. We just couldn't. What they would do is tell people they had just sold that house, all that crap. And so I had a very bad taste of Tulsa. We didn't come down at that point, but later when he saw this thing and said, we need to move to Tulsa, I'm going, oh, dear God. And Tulsa has been very good to me.
Yes, right. Let's give you credit here. I'm going to back up here because you were a professional potter, ceramist. You produced and sold pottery, taught classes. I mean, you had that creative side to you as well.
Yeah, yep.
That was her Ann Arbor other thing that she was doing.
But you adapted to Tulsa immediately and enjoyed with the theater company the work you were doing. A little more about that.
Well, it essentially, as I suggested, gave me a chance to put, you might say, both sides of my professional life together for the first time. And what I enjoyed doing was more of the writing for the first time about theater in a situation where I was commenting on performances we were preparing and doing. Like I remember the first one I wrote about was they were just doing, when I arrived, the Diary of Anne Frank. And so it gave me the first time to really kind of do some research about the Holocaust and what was going on, and then write a little essay about that. And so that was kind of my fundamental job. Every time that they would pick and do a play, I would write an essay about it that we would put in a companion reader, essentially, that went along. So I did that all the way through, and so that was a great experience. I did a little bit of directing, less successful, but I had a great time producing a production, a modern dress version of Sophocles' Oedipus the King that the American Theater Company did. So that continued for the 2 years, and then the grant essentially ran out, and by that time, however, Nancy had established her professional life, beginning with DVIS, the Domestic Intervention Service, which he can talk about. But I had written one essay defending the American theater, resident theater groups. They're doing a Christmas Carol every holiday season. And many had criticized the resident theater movement for doing it. They saw it was just a moneymaker, why do this? And I wrote an essay, and it finally got published in the National Theater magazine called Christmas Carol, Is It More Than Just Money? And what I was trying to show them was that it really was part of two things. One, it saved the celebration of Christmas. That is, when Charles Dickens writes Christmas Carol, mostly by that time people didn't make much of Christmas celebration. It was really, the Puritans particularly thought it was unseemly to do that, this whole thing about, and he was trying to show that it could be, theologically ennobling if you understood the real his version of a story about Christmas Carol. So I took that and said, look, he saved Christmas when he wrote it for the first time, and now we continue to use it as a ritualized way to remind people that there's more going on at Christmas than just giving each other presents.
Mm-hmm. Who are some of the other people at the American Theater Company that people might remember their names?
Greg Roach was one of the leading actors. Melanie Fry. They did a version of another person that comes immediately to mind, of course, is Bob Odell. And they did a version that just usually broke everybody up, which was their kind of version of a way every summer of doing a satire about Tulsa life or Oklahoma. Mm-hmm. It was called the Joyce Martell Review, mm-hmm. and it was hysterical, and they had so much fun doing that. Carl Kraus, they still do Christmas Carol, I think, every year around the holiday season. And Carl has been doing Scrooge now for years, I think.
Isn't it nice to know that Tulsa was a community that had such a respected place?
Yes.
Not only here, but apparently nationally, too. You were introduced to it.
Yes.
Right.
Yes, I was.
Yeah. Let's bring you then into your work here, Nancy, as Ted just talked about the Domestic Violence Intervention Services. How did you become executive director?
It was a funny thing. I was going to try to find a job when I came down. I waited a while, and when Ted came down to interview, he said, they're very excited down there to have another woman coming, a feminist. And I said, oh, great. So I came down, I applied for a job, volunteer management for the DVIS, and they didn't want me. And I thought, that's fine. And then the exec came up, and I thought, well, what the heck, I can apply for that too. So I got that job. And I thought, boy, doesn't take much to get a job as an exec. Exactly. Anyway, I had a great time, and one of the, I should tell you, the first morning, one of the staff came in and handed her resignation, and I thought, well, okay. Then one came in and said, "You've got to deal with the police. They're not helping us at all." Well, okay. And then the courthouse called and said, "If you don't get this straightened out up here, we're going to have to do away with this program." And I thought, could you give me till noon? The list was long. I knew it was going to be a challenge, and it was great. And
what was their concern?
The police would just ignore it and lump it into, just a regular stop. So nobody knew what was going on, really.
And what were you doing? What was the service that you were providing?
Protection from women, for women and children. And they had a house that had the number of roaches equal to population of New York City. We were housing 35 women and children every night in a 5-bedroom house. And so that's when we knew we had to get out of there. But that's when we built the shelter, the first one.
The men were involved in these lives find the house and try to come to it and come in?
Yeah, yeah.
That would happen a lot.
Yeah, we had the security in the first house was a basket of baseball bats. I wanted to do everything. I wanted to experience all that stuff. So they said, well, why don't you stay overnight tonight, experience what it's like. Well, it was an awful night. The phone was ringing constantly. The next day they said, well, that's because it was a full moon.
Wow.
And it did. It frequently did.
You know, I admire the fact that you stayed there for 3 years. You continued that work.
Well, I probably would have been there longer, but Nancy and Ray Feldman talked me into. We were at a party at their house. I had heard that she wanted me to apply for Planned Parenthood. So Ted and I were kind of last ones out, and they wanted to tell us, persuade us, and Ted and I walked out about 1 o'clock, and he said, well, what do you think? And I said, I'm really happy where I am. And he said, would you just shut up and think about it?
Think the way he thought.
Well, Nancy sent me that stack of stuff to read, and, I read through it, and I said, I could do that job. So I did apply.
Right. So Nancy, I guess in 1988 then, you become president and CEO of Planned Parenthood of Arkansas and Eastern Oklahoma. Your role to begin with that, was that a shock? Was it an easy transition?
Well, it's always interesting to find out what's happening in an organization. And I was blessed with a terrific board in both of those organizations. They were very thoughtful about the way they introduced me to the whole board and supporters. It was just a great time. I loved raising money. Ruth Nelson, who is the best fundraising person at that time, she and I would go out on a call together, and she said, I've worked with many people in fundraising, and she said, you're the best. That was like, wow.
Mm-hmm. And who was that?
Ruth Nelson.
Ruth Nelson, yes.
She was incredible at raising money.
She was a sister of George Kaiser.
Yeah.
Right. She was good at it.
Oh, yeah.
And so were you then. Now, that wasn't easy, probably, to raise money for Planned Parenthood.
Actually, we went to people who believed in it,
yeah, right.
And there were a lot of people. Some didn't want their name on it, and that's fine. It's different in the way you have to approach it and protect people and so on. But I think the exciting part of that was building new programs. We were the first one in the country. When I came, there were about 160 affiliates across the country. We were the first ones to introduce prenatal care, and everybody said, we're reproductive health. What are we doing? Having babies is reproductive. But it took a lot of talking with the national office to get them to support us. We finally were delivering 1,800 babies a year in Medicaid services, and they had managed care who come to town, and managed care didn't want to touch us. We were too expensive. So we had to get rid of the managed care crap first. Mm-hmm. But those kind of, we did that. We broadened the even services for women, and then we started male services. We did full male services. It wasn't just one thing, like diseases. Mm-hmm. We did that too, of course. But that was pretty exciting. What I was doing is moving the affiliate toward primary care. And I did that for two reasons. It was necessary care for people. And the other thing was the whole country, not Planned Parenthood, but the whole medical system was going to primary care. And I knew once that hit, the person is blocked from going to a specialty service for their care. So it was a twofold kind of reason to put that male babies. When we started delivering, women would come back to us and say, "There's nobody to take care of my baby." And I said, "Well, that's kind of dumb. We shouldn't let that happen." So we started pediatrics. Got a lot of flack from the national office. But when I resigned, and I was talking with one of them after I left, and he said, "You did the right thing. You were the first one to see what was happening and how the rest of the country was losing out because they couldn't take that person as a full client."
You said you had 1,800 deliveries, and often Planned Parenthood is attached to abortion, and they hear that word and they think abortion immediately. Wouldn't that be true for many?
Oh, yeah.
And so then, I mean, it was difficult. There was public controversy about this, political opposition,
Sure.
and you had to speak out in defense of abortion and why it was necessary in some cases.
Absolutely.
Talk to me about how that went for you.
First of all, before reproductive services started by Planned Parenthood as a separate entity. So that was one way that we were bright light, because we could say, go to reproductive services. And that group took a lot of the flack from us. It made it easier for a lot of people to come to our clinics because they weren't associated. And the ones that needed an abortion would go there. People that picketed every week. Occasionally we'd have a woman call us and say, who was a picketer, would you let me come in early and leave after the picketers leave? I want an abortion. And she'd be back on the line marching the next week. I mean, usually that didn't happen always, and I go, what's that about? Mm-hmm. Well, I can say it's about abuse at home, that if the partner knew, would it be an abusive thing. And the other one is she knows what's best for her, and she knows what's best for you. And there's probably 6 other reasons. But anyway, that was, and they got, that guy busted their clinic up, and finally did ours too by throwing glass with, something that caught fire.
And they'd throw it.
Into the building.
And you were in the building?
No, I wasn't,
Oh.
and nobody was.
Okay.
But it happened like 3 times, and one of our staff, he called, the guy that did it was like 15. He called and said, well, I bombed the place, and next time I'm going to do you people or something like that. And she said, well, do you know what we do here? So she explained it to him, and he said, oh, well, I didn't know you did all that. And she said, yeah, do you want to come visit sometime and I'll take you on a tour? And he said, I'd really like that. You go, what?
Did you say his age was
Probably 15 or
15?
I was
At that
16.
time, yeah.
He couldn't drive, and he rode his bike there. But his mother and father had the bombs, the previous war or something. They helped him.
So then it'd be interesting if he told them he took a tour and maybe he changed his mind about everything. We don't know.
No.
So is there anything else before we move on from this issue that you would make a comment on?
Well, there were times in Planned Parenthood time where the windows would get shot out or the alarm would ring in the middle of the night, and I'd have to go down and see what was going on and call the police. And I'm pretty fearless about things.
Mm-hmm.
So one night the police wanted to go through the building, and they wanted me to see if anything was missing. And so I led the dogs into finally I'm saying, wait a minute, I shouldn't be the
lead dog in there.
Yeah. It's mostly show. They come out to protest. They get the news out there, and then they go home.
Okay, they just want to make some headlines.
Yeah. That's one block of people.
Okay.
The others are violent, knocking things over and so on.
You must have admired her. You heard her talk about the domestic violence and then this particular job, and you knew that she was qualified and could do it. You were very supportive of it, I would imagine.
Yes. Nancy, I really felt the reason I didn't push for me to apply for jobs at other theater companies, which was one of the possibilities after the 2 years here with American Theater Company, was I felt it was really her time, her chance. She had gotten the DVIS back on its feet, had worked out relationships with the police, got to know Drew Diamond at that time.
Mm-hmm. And that was fun.
Yeah, made a great change in the way the police were doing that. And I just knew that if she took over Planned Parenthood, which was in between directors at that time and was kind of trying to figure out what they were going to do in Tulsa, that I thought she would bring the kind of creative spirit and ideas that would get them to expand their services and be able to do something with Planned Parenthood that hadn't happened here in Tulsa. And by that time, I figured I'll find something here, academically or otherwise, and work out a way to continue my professional career. I wanted her to take on this larger challenge of Planned Parenthood, and that's the way it really worked out. It took me about 6 months after she took that job before a friend of mine who was teaching at Tulsa Community College came to me and said, hey, a humanities position is going to be open as of, and I think it was January of the next year. And he said, would you like for me to put your name in? And I said, sure, I'm looking for work and I can certainly do the humanities given my PhD. And sure enough, TCC called me in and interviewed me and said, yeah, you fit really nice. And so I started teaching down at Metro in humanities. And then when Dean Van Treese lost his theater person, he came to me and he said, look, I've read you were here at the American Theater Company, and I've looked at your resume. You have all this theater in your background. Would you take the theater program on? And I said, well, why why now? And he said, well, I think we're getting ready to build a new performing arts center, and I need somebody who knows theater if we're going to try and do that. And I said, oh, okay. And so I began, and we were initially producing plays in the downtown Tulsa Performing Arts Center. But 2 years later, sure enough, Dean had gotten the ball rolling, and the new Performing Arts Center that would be built on the Southwest campus was going to be there. And so I became the transitional figure, at least for the theater program, to move its life out there until I ran that program until 1999. And that's when I told them, you need to get somebody else. I've done this long enough, and decided I would retire.
40 years in college teaching and administration.
Yeah.
Right, and that's a beautiful facility out there. Dean Van Treese, I've interviewed. Ray and Nancy Feldman are also on our website, and we have their stories as well.
Yeah.
And I always talk about Dean Van Treese because when they brought the concept of a community college or a junior college from Dallas to here, nobody had heard about that concept. And he had to sell the idea to this community because everybody thought, well, you have to, they were kind of snobbish about it. They had to have a 4-year college.
Yeah.
And Oral Roberts was actually a big proponent and helped Dean Van Treese sell that to the community.
Super. One of the big adventures was when we were adopting the children from Bogota, Colombia.
Yeah, right.
I could only go down for 5 weeks, and that was important because we were working out the legal issues and how you got things done in Colombia for the first 2 kids we adopted. But she ended up having to stay because, again, of the way the rules were in Colombia at that time, for almost 12 weeks. And that was quite an adventure. And she then came back from that and became part of the crew in Ann Arbor, Michigan, that were Colombian American Friends, which was this intercountry adoption agency that we set up at that time. And Nancy was one of their primary persons to help people figure out if they really wanted to adopt a Colombian child at that time. That was how we got our 3rd child, was Nancy working with the agency down in Colombia, and them saying, we're worried about this woman. She's 12 now, and if we don't get her adopted, it was a broken adoption is the reason they call, but that's how we got our 3rd child. But all I'm saying is that piece of work that she did in Ann Arbor during that time period too, for about 4 or 5 years, was very important. I think what we ended up placing, didn't we, you guys say at one time it was about 500?
No, I think it was closer to 300, but
okay,
a bunch. We ran that as a place for finding children homes, not doing the opposite, which is finding children for families. And it's a very different thing.
But you lived in Colombia.
Yes.
And why?
Well,
It took that long to get them out.
Yeah.
Oh, and you were introduced to that Colombia adoption agency in Ann Arbor.
Yeah.
And that's how, okay. So
Well,
then what?
We started one couple that were with the university. He was a teacher. They went on a sabbatical. The wife visited all the orphanages and began to get involved with that, and they adopted the first child. There was no program at that point. They came back, and Ted and I and another couple started the foundation.
Oh, you started the adoption
Yeah.
foundation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
And we were the first ones to get.
Yeah. Then
To
we
get
became
children.
the guinea pigs. That is, we went down.
And you actually adopted.
Yes, and that was because we knew we needed to figure out what's really going to happen down there.
No,
And then-
we did that because the dog died, And-
there we go.
and Ted baptized the two kids that came back before we started the program. He said, I think we ought to adopt. We weren't going to have children. We were happy. I was happy.
Yeah, we were 11 years into marriage before we did our first adoption. But yes, John, I guess all I was trying to say, particularly Nancy, was at the heart of that. Once we got it founded, then she was one of the 2 or 3 women, right, that did the actual work with families, and then the FANTA, which was the name of the agency in Bogota that we worked with. And the idea was as they got abandoned children, we would help them do placements. Yeah. That's why she said the thing about our view was we would find families after there were abandoned children. We weren't trying to be primarily seen. We said, there can be other agencies do the other. We were not opposed to families looking for children. But we said this other piece is missing, where there are actually abandoned children that need families. And that's why we set up Colombian American Friends.
So then you adopted 3 children. How old are they now?
Well, the oldest one, who's 12, was 12, is she's almost 60, and the other 2 are 50. We don't know what age is. We made them up. They're probably 51. I don't know, but one was found in a cardboard box in front of the orphanage. That was one of our daughters. And our son was found probably in a rooming house. And he was left there, and he cried and cried and cried and cried. And finally, she went into the room and saw him by himself. And she wanted to take care of him, and then realized she really couldn't. So then she took him to an orphanage. But he would have died. They both would have died if we hadn't done that.
So you saved lives too. Did you have these children challenges in raising them here?
Oh my God.
There was. Okay.
Yeah. The oldest one, we had no idea the damage that had been done to her. She can't read, can't write, still. And we've done everything imaginable to do that. But my colleague in the service called me that day, and she said, "We've got this young girl that needs a home," and she said, "I've worked on it all day, and I cannot find a family that will take her." And I said, do you have pictures of her? And she said, "Yeah." And so she brought over the carousel with slides. And I set them up on the kitchen counter, and Ted came home, and I said, "Honey, do you want to see our new daughter?"
And I agreed.
He came over and looked at the pictures and said, "Yeah, great. Well, we spend more time choosing a carpet."
Right. Then, yeah, I'll take her.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Are they living here in Tulsa?
They all are. 3 all are. Daniel, our son, is Le Cordon Bleu chain chef and has been living and working here in various restaurants, etc. He's now a manager for the tight athletic facility over on the west side of the river down that way,
Yeah.
and runs their food services essentially for them.
The other two, are they?
They're both here. Samantha, our youngest daughter, but actually they're about 52 or 53 now. And the eldest is, I think she will turn 60 this year. But as Nancy says, I mean, the agency didn't have any birth certificates on any of these kids, so it was all guessing how old they were. But yeah, and then Rosa is here, lives with her husband, Steve, a guy who's Tulsa native. And we'd have a grandson. Rosa had a son. And so he's still here, and he has a partner, Nicole. And so we have a family in Tulsa.
Right. And they're certainly aware of how you rescued them.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
But since you're an actor, you get involved in Chautauqua.
Yes.
Tell us what Chautauqua is.
Okay. Chautauqua is a summertime actual humanities supported program that tries to bring history alive, as I refer to it, by asking scholar performers, again, this combination of a person's ability to actually present in a first-person characterization a historical figure from the past. Mostly we've done characters out of American history. And usually what happens is we have 5 of us that accept invitations from various cities or places around a theme. Like the first one I got involved in was called the American Progressive Era. And the character I created for my first Chautauqua here in Tulsa in the summer of 1992 was William Jennings Bryan, the famous orator who literally ran for president unsuccessfully 3 times. But that's the kind of thing. And I've been fortunate. I've done almost 7 different characters, I think now, and even a few for a futurist out on the East Coast who had a need for some other characters that I didn't do in the local Chautauqua. But we have been running an Oklahoma Chautauqua now since '92, and it's still going on. It is now being done in usually 4 cities, 3 for sure every summer, and usually there's a 4th that is tacked on. And that group of 5 actors, performers, travel to each one of them and spend a week there doing workshops and then the evening performances where. And the neat thing about Chautauqua, from my viewpoint, is you not only present the character in person and then answer questions in person. So you really have to know the person's life and what they were concerned about and the issues that they were articulating in their time. But then you step out of character for the final 15 or so minutes, and then people in the audience, the Chautauqua audience, can ask you questions as a scholar performer. What did you really think about? So the interesting thing for me is the last one I did 2 summers ago was in a Chautauqua-themed The 60s Surviving, and I did Timothy Leary.
Yes. Did you do some LSD to enter into
No,
that?
this time I didn't use the sacred substance, as we refer to them. I just did it on my own.
Yes, but you did Sir Winston Churchill, you did William Shakespeare,
Yeah.
H.G. Wells, Generals Robert E. Lee, William Sherman, as well as Frank Lloyd Wright, who had a presence in our own city, as a matter of fact.
Right.
And P.T. Barnum, Thomas Edison. Okay, I suppose the question would be, which one was your favorite?
And it's always like asking a parent, which one of your children is your favorite, right? What happens, I think, for most of us is every time we're working, usually we have about a year to prepare, we're working on a character. We get so involved with that one and so committed to making them come alive again for people that it becomes our favorite. If I had to pick, okay, it has to be for me, William Shakespeare, because of my love of theater and the chance to get to pretend to be the bard and carry that character forward was probably, if not the favorite, certainly one of my favorite Chautauqua experiences.
Did you, in your classroom experience, were you able to teach about any of these people? And did your Chautauqua experience help you in that, or vice versa?
But both, and you're right. And I did, because I taught not only theater and those kinds of things, but I taught humanities in a way that essentially was my attempt to go back and begin in the ancient Near East with the Greeks and the Hebrews, and talk about these parallel traditions that have informed European, Western, and American society. And in doing that, I had many of those characters, like you mentioned, Sir Winston Churchill, Shakespeare. So I had that part of it. We did the Civil War twice, so that I could play both sides of the Civil War, being both the General Robert E. Lee and then William Tecumseh Sherman. So it's that kind of stuff that, so when you go into the classroom, sure, you have a way of not only that you know their lives in some detail, but a way of pointing to things in their lives, and even sometimes I would enact a portion of a person's life so that my class got a sense of it. As Nancy could tell you, one time we were at the Tulsa Performing Arts Center, and a man who was a lawyer came walking over the row and said, "Dr. Kachel, I'm so glad to see you. I just wanted you to know your humanities course changed the course of my life." And I said, "Really? I hope for the better." And he said, "Oh, yes." He said, "I decided to work hard in school and become a lawyer." And he said, "I don't think I would have done it without your course."
Isn't that great to hear that?
It is.
Those students that were in your class, to all of a sudden, you're talking about Winston Churchill, and then pretty soon you became that Winston Churchill, right?
Yes, yes.
What a unique experience.
Yeah, it was fun. It was just great.
Yes.
I never knew who I was living with when he was getting close to performing it.
Right.
The last week. It was like, who are you today?
That's good. But that, as much as we've talked about you guys and your great careers, you also have written mysteries.
Yes.
More than one?
2 now, and we're working on the 3rd.
All right. The Farmer's Daughter Mysteries by Nancy and Ted Kachel. Now, how did this come about?
Well, we changed the title, by the way, but Ted and I were sitting out on our balcony having a drink one summer night, and Ted said, I don't know what I want to write now. And I had just come home from Iowa and visited the old farm, and there was a river that went by the farm. I just had this vision, not real, but it was a vision of a guy floating down the river on his back with his arms sticking straight up. Obviously, rigor mortis had set in, and I thought, boy, that would be a nice mystery story kind of thing. So I went back and I wrote 17 pages and gave it up. I told Ted about it that night, and he said, well, let's do it together. And I thought, you and I have never done a damn thing together. I'm afraid we'd kill each other. He said, well, let's try it. And we had the most fun. Probably that is the single thing I can say that it was so joyous for me. And so one night when he was invited out to Lawton to a fundraiser.
Oh, yeah, you're talking about when I was invited out to do General Sherman for a collection of military people who were associated with the university in Lawton there. And they had heard about this guy who does generals, and they thought it would be great fun to have Sherman come out.
So I brought that up because it's another thing that we did together. I said, I'm not going to go with you going with the blue uniform. I'm going to go as Vinnie Reams, who was his traveling companion. And she was a very famous sculptress at that time. In fact, there's a piece in the Capitol. But she always worked in her bloomers. And that's all I had to know. And I was being photographed and talked about bloomers and
She had this full costume, and so it was just wild.
Back to the book. We really got into it, and we're so different about everything. I mean, he's a word person, and I'm a visual person, and it really worked out well. He did some of the stories about the characters got themselves into, and I would talk about the farm and and then I would mesh them and create the...
You did the final manuscript then?
No, we did the manuscript. I mean, we would go back and forth, rewriting. By the time we were through, I think both of us said it would be hard to pick out, what was really one of us. What she's pointing to is, because of my theater background, I tended to write scenes where dialogue and people were, involved that way. Whereas she would fill in not landscape just in the sense of that is scenery and settings for which the action was happening in. But what she would do is connect a lot of the story. She would find the connecting pieces that would move from one scene to another. The action, not just describing description. It wasn't that. So we both were creating story, it would be my way of saying.
Okay, but then you blended it all together, is that true? Right.
Yeah.
And so you wrote it together.
Yeah.
And so you've already done 2 and you're working on another one?
Yeah, now we refer to the series as the Irregular SEAL Team. It still begins and is set around this big farming operation in Iowa. That's where all these people have met.
Okay.
But one of them was a retired SEAL who's come to live on and work on the farm. And
he came because he lost. He was a commander at the highest level. And he lost the love of his life when she took a bullet for him.
Yeah.
She saw the red blot, and it just about killed him.
Okay, this is in the world of your imagination. We should be saying this right now.
Oh, of course.
Right.
No, this was the mystery, the first one.
So he went to the farm to heal.
Yeah.
And finds the farm pretty exciting.
So is it known then as the Farmer's Daughter Mysteries?
No.
Did you change the name?
The Irregular SEAL Team, we changed it to that.
So the series is...
The Irregular SEAL Team Mysteries.
Okay, all right. So can you buy them on Amazon?
You can, and the way to really get there, though, is to use either one of our names and just ask, because that will take you to it. So far, anyway, we've also used, that's the series title, but we have individual titles for the mysteries, so it's the easiest just to use the author's name.
Mm-hmm. Well, what a journey we've been on here for 2.5 hours today. It's been most interesting. Both of you would have advice to young people that are coming along, that are listening to this, because teachers have been using this as resource material, and they actually make assignments to Voices of Oklahoma. You have a chance to speak to them right now. So, Nancy, do you have any advice for young people?
I think it's great for young people to learn from us old people, but they need to do their own thing. They need to do what what meets their needs and what they feel good about. And that may connect with some of us that I hope learn from some of the things we've done. Follow your dream, work at it, and find spaces for doing what you want to do.
Yeah. Ted?
Very similar, but my way of putting it is write your own story. Don't let anybody else become the author. They can be enablers, they can be helpers. They certainly, your parents, if you're fortunate as we were, will give you that boost to get you going. But finally, what you have to do is find your own story, your narrative for your particular life, drawing into it whatever other people are important to you as you go along your way. But author your own story. You're the only one who can do it, so do it with a lot of gusto.
Ted, how would you like to be remembered?
I think what I want to be remembered mainly as is a person who inspired other people to live great lives.
Nancy?
Well, I think I would like to be remembered as a person who helped other people and who loves other people. And my favorite thing is hugs. Just go out there and find a bunch of them.
Well, I just sit here on behalf of the whole city of Tulsa. I'm going to assume that mantle of saying thank you for the involvement you made in so many areas of this life, of this community. Both of you inspired individuals, changed lives, helped people. And you can't say that to every couple. It's either one or the other, but here is a couple.
Here,
You both have done this.
Here, here.
And so we just say thank you. And thank you for sharing the story. I enjoyed listening to you.
Thank you.
We appreciate the opportunity that you've given us to tell our story.
All right.
You have been listening to the Voices of Oklahoma podcast, stories taken from the oral history website, voicesofoklahoma.com. At the website, you will discover an array of storytellers. Many you will know. Some will be new to you, but all will be worth your time. This work depends on listeners like you, who are interested in learning about the great people of Oklahoma. Our website provides an opportunity to donate to this 501c3 project, which preserves Oklahoma history, one voice at a time. voicesofoklahoma.com.